And thanks everyone. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for AFT's second WEP and GPO informational webinar. My name is Rob Weil. I'm the Director of Research Policy and Field Programs in the Ed Issues Department at the AFT. If you are here, that likely means you are in some way impacted by the Windfall Elimination Provision, or WEP, and or the Government Pension Offset, GPO. I'm with you. I am personally subject to both these injustices. I will personally have to deal with both the WEP and the GPO. To give an overview of these penalties, the WEP and the GPO affect people based on the state from which they retire, not necessarily the state in which they live. Teachers and public employees who retire from work in 15 states and some locals and Puerto Rico may be subject to the WEP and/or the GPO. The 15 states in question are Alaska, California, Colorado, my home state, or where I worked, Connecticut, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Missouri, Nevada, Ohio, Rhode Island, and Texas. The total number of retirees impacted by these penalties surpasses 2.5 million individuals, and an estimated 6.4 million current employees will be impacted upon their retirement as of 2018. The WEP cuts into your Social Security benefit by up to half the value of your pension for people who earn a pension from work not covered by Social Security and who have worked other jobs where Social Security taxes were paid long enough to qualify for those benefits. The GPO cuts up to the full amount of your spousal or survivor benefits if you earn a government pension from work that does not pay into Social Security. These laws are complicated, as they are unjust, and that's why AFT supports the full repeal of both the WEP and the GPO. We will circulate information from Social Security Administration after this webinar that will allow you to calculate what your benefits will be after the penalties are applied, as well as some other key information on the current issues that can and will impact your security, the security of your retirement. This evening, we will hear from a number of wonderful speakers who will fill you in on the latest legislative updates from the new Congress, as well as the latest news from the activist group working to repeal both the WEP and the GPO. We will also hear about the cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, to your public pensions and the way to get active in the fight for more secure retirement for all. Over the course of this quick 1-hour seminar webinar, please feel free to encourage to submit your questions for our speakers through the Q&A feature. We will take as many questions as we can, time permitting. Since we have a full agenda this evening, I will go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Meghan Stockhausen, our first speaker, Meghan Stockhausen. Meghan is the Assistant Director of the American Federation of Teachers Governmental Affairs Department in Washington, D.C. She lobbies on behalf of the AFT on retirement security, labor and employment rights, taxation, the democracy, native issues, current technical education, broadband and immigration, a lot of stuff. During campaign cycles, she also works with AFT's independent expenditure team. She received her bachelor's from McGill University and completed her Juris Doctorate at the University at District of Columbia. Prior to attending law school, she served as a Peace Corps volunteer. In fact, she does everything. And I want to thank Meghan for being here. So Meghan, please take over. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for the introduction, Rob. I really appreciate you kind of introducing WEP GPO. It's such a complicated topic and it affects so many public servants, retired and in service. So today we're going to go over a legislative update to just kind of walk through where things stand as we start this new Congress. I know that many of you are aware that WEP GPO and the fight to repeal it has been a long fight. But there's some positive developments, and there are some things working in our favor. So there's certainly reason to be optimistic. Okay, so just in terms of to kind of set the political landscape, The GPO came into existence in 1978, and followed by the WEP in 1982. The political rhetoric around WEP GPO at the time was this idea that you had public servants who were double dipping. They were entitled to a pension and entitled to Social Security. So what politicians did, and this was, sadly, this was Republicans and this was some Democrats, is that they created a formula that would reduce people's Social Security if they were entitled to a pension from work in public service where they weren't paying Social Security taxes. However, what's ended up happening is you have a formula that's incredibly harsh, as Rob alluded to. And in the case of GPO, it can completely wipe out a worker's survivors benefits. And with with WEP, we have members who are seeing monthly cuts to their Social Security benefits that run as high as $500, $600. I mean, this is an incredible amount of money when you're living in retirement. And even if you're trying to be frugal, these penalties to your Social Security benefits are certainly egregious. So what we've seen really over the last 4 decades is every single congressional session, we have bills that come up that would either fully repeal WEP GPO or reform WEP GPO. They tend to get many Democrats on board as co-sponsors or officially kind of stating that they'll vote for the bill. And they also tend to get, a chunk of Republican support. Usually that's from Republicans that are coming from one of the 15 impacted states. So that, that happens cycle after cycle. Over the years, we've had, President Obama coming from Illinois, coming from a WEP impacted state. He called for full repeal, as has President Joe Biden. So we've had a mix of presidential platforms have been in different places when it comes to WEP GPO, but year after, congressional session after congressional session, we do see high levels of bipartisan support for repeal. There is concern for the people who don't support repeal of WEP GPO. They often talk about or justify their lack of support in terms of the impact on Social Security's finances. Actuaries have looked at this, and so there's statistics that say Social Security only has 10 more years before it runs out of money. And the folks who look at and compile those statistics say that if we repealed WEP GPO, Social Security would only have 9 more years. I would really forcefully push back against any critique that said that Social Security is on the brink of crisis. I think it's incredibly important to remember that often the people who are pushing this idea that Social Security is in crisis and that we can't fix WEP GPO, those are folks who aren't willing to do reforms that are pretty common sense that would extend Social Security's solvency by many decades. And the AFT as a union is very much committed to, on the one hand, fully repealing WEP GPO, but on the second hand, enacting the reforms that we need to make sure Social Security is strong, healthy, and expanded. So we can certainly do both. Okay, so the last congressional session, so that the 2 years before this last round of elections, so 2021 and 2022, we saw significant progress on WEP GPO reform, which really gives me a lot of hope for this congressional session. So we had a couple of bills that addressed WEP and GPO. So the first one on the list, which I'll refer to as HR 82, that would fully repeal WEP and GPO. That's a bill that AFT has supported for a long time and continues to actively support. So this bill has bipartisan support, and it was recently reintroduced, which is fantastic. We also have the Public Servants Protection and Fairness Act of 2021. This bill reforms WEP WEP, but it doesn't eliminate it. It doesn't touch the GPO. It leaves the GPO as is, which is problematic. And it instead of eliminating WEP, it makes it less painful. Like, so it shrinks the amount of penalty that that retirees would face. So if this became law, a retiree would who was impacted by WEP would see their Social Security benefits increase. The AFT, and this is kind of really where a moment where you think about strategy. From our perspective, we will always fight for and push for full reform. But in the last congressional session, we did endorse this because we thought some progress is a little bit better than nothing. But honestly, this bill didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really move. And then the third bill on this list is a comprehensive Social Security reform package. This increases taxes, has the wealthy pay their fair share, and it also repeals WEP. So, for many reasons, we've supported the Social Security 2100 Act. On HR 82, on the bill fully repealing WEP and fully repealing GPO. Last congressional session, there were 305 co-sponsors. That's massive. Like that there are rarely bills that get 305 co-sponsors, especially in a context that we're currently in, where you rarely have bills that are bipartisan. So the fact that this bill managed to get 93 Republicans, beyond the 30 or 40 from WEP impacted and GPO impacted states, and the fact that it managed to get 218 Democrats, so many Democrats who represent districts that aren't impacted directly by WEP and GPO, all co-sponsored this bill. So that is fantastic. We've never seen as much momentum, as much activism, and as much awareness of WEP GPO as we did this last congressional session. So we had, leading the charge, we had Representative Abby Spanberger from Virginia. Virginia has many federal employees that are impacted by WEP GPO. And then we also had former Representative Rodney Davis from Illinois. Abby Spanberger is was reelected in a really tight race, and she's committed to, fighting the good fight and pushing WEP GPO reform forward. So she's really been a galvanizing force, and truly pressed for this legislation to pass. The Republican co-sponsor, Mr. Davis, he lost his primary to a far-right MAGA Republican challenger. So he's no longer serving in Congress. A congressman from Louisiana, Garrett Graves, has taken over as the lead Republican co-sponsor. Despite all the co-sponsors and all the support for HR 82, it never came to a full House vote. Now, that's because the Democrat who's very powerful, who heads the committee, the House Ways and Means Committee, he didn't recommend the bill for a full House vote. Because of the way Congress works, if you preside over, if you're the chair of a committee that has jurisdiction on the bill, you can effectively kill the progress on a bill. So that that is where we were left. Okay, so the outlook for the current congressional term, after the elections, we are very much in a new space. The Senate companion bill, so the Senate version of HR 82, hasn't been introduced in the Senate yet, but we have every reason to expect that Senator Sherrod Brown from Ohio will reintroduce it. He's championed WEP GPO repeal for the last few congressional sessions, and he's very committed to, to seeing this through and to pushing this bill forward. So that we expect that, in the next month or so. On the House side, HR 82 was reintroduced just a few days ago. And we've seen a steady stream of congressional co-sponsors joining. So that's a fantastic sign. As many of you are aware, because the House Republican caucus had a difficult time electing a speaker, we're a little bit delayed. So, maybe if the speaker contest had progressed at a normal pace, it might have been reintroduced a little sooner, and we might have a few more co-sponsors at this point. But there's nothing abnormal in the pace. The fact that it was introduced January 9th is, just 6 days after they opened this congressional session is a great sign, and it has a steady drumbeat of co-sponsors. Okay, so currently we have 59 co-sponsors, and it's a bipartisan split, which is great. And this is typical. This is completely typical. So very happy with the progress of co-sponsors. So original co-sponsors, this is kind of the team of congressional representatives that are really leading the charge on the bill. You'll notice that it's split between Republicans and Democrats. This is also strategically, this is great, that we have more than just Abigail Spanberger and Garrett Graves leading the charge. They've pulled in Democrats from California and Republicans from a handful of states, Florida, Kentucky, and Louisiana. So Kentucky and Louisiana have public servants that are impacted by WEP and GPO, and Florida, because of the number of retirees that move to Florida, after they've retired, it has many residents, many constituents who are impacted by WEP GPO. Okay, so if we look at our current list of co-sponsors, we have members of Congress from every impacted state, but Alaska, Ohio, and Massachusetts are represented. We have a ton of states that, aren't necessarily directly impacted by WEP GPO, but they're, clearly this issue is resonating, and members of Congress from those states are deciding to co-sponsor full WEP and GPO repeal, despite, maybe having a smaller number of constituents that are impacted. So that's a good sign. We fully expect the number of co-sponsors to increase. If you can check on congress.gov to see if your member of Congress has co-sponsored HR 82. And if they haven't, my advice is to ask them to sponsor it. It always helps to ask, and offices truly pay attention to what constituents say, especially on an issue like this. Okay, so I think in terms of strategy moving forward, I think it's important that activists really reach out to every single member, Republican or Democrat, on the House Ways and Means Committee. This committee has jurisdiction over Social Security, and it has the ability, no matter how many co-sponsors are on a bill, it has the ability to essentially prevent a bill that deals with an issue that the committee is responsible for from getting to the House floor and getting voted out of the House of Representatives. So I think that one thing we have to do, and that I think might present a challenge in some ways, is to really grow the number of House Republican co-sponsors. There's a solid number on the bill right now. Last congressional session, you had a good number of Republican co-sponsors, but we just need to increase that number. And then increase the number of co-sponsors. So, there's really a large class of new members of the House of Representatives. We're in the high 30s in terms of new members. And there's certainly a handful of new senators. Many people aren't familiar with WEP GPO. They might be aware of broader Social Security policy, but they might not really know the nuances of WEP and GPO. So making sure that new members of Congress and new members of the Senate understand the burden that WEP GPO places on their constituents, and understand that retirees and current public servants want to see WEP GPO repealed is crucially important. So the Senate is always a challenge, just because of the structure of the Senate. You really need 60 votes to get anything through, and this presents a challenge for WEP GPO repeal, as well as many other pieces of legislation. Getting 10 Republicans to co-sponsor Sherrod Brown's Senate companion bill to HR 82, will be a challenge. There's there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Getting 10 Republicans on board a bill that has more Democratic support than Republican will be a challenge, but it's certainly not impossible. And this issue has garnered a lot of bipartisan support in the past. So shoring up Democratic Senate support is also important, because you certainly have Democrats that will point to the cost to Social Security, or will point to larger issues with the budget, but making sure that they know that this is a popular thing to do, is absolutely critical. And then I think that as we move forward, it's also important to make sure that any comprehensive Social Security bill includes WEP GPO. So we don't want to be left on the sidelines if a comprehensive package ever ends up moving. I mean, in some ways, it's very hard for comprehensive Social Security to move forward, because of procedural rules within the House of Representatives and the Senate. But it's still important that that it's a part of the conversation about how we strengthen Social Security. And that's it from my end, Chris. It's kind of my quick report. It's always a pleasure to talk about this, and I'll certainly share. I'll certainly be here for questions afterward.
Hey, thank you, Megan, for that information. Activists in this space did incredible work over the course of the last Congress towards repealing these penalties. As we renew the fight for the repeal in the 118th Congress, it is not insignificant that this movement presents a rare opportunity for bipartisan cooperation in a Congress that is facing down 2 years of gridlock. AFT will host a phone bank next week, and I saw there was in the chat, calling representatives to co-sign the full repeal bill. Reintroduced at the beginning of last year, this is a great opportunity to get involved in the repeal effort, and to link to register, and a link to the register of phone bank will be sent out following the webinar. It's also on the chat. With the legislative battle for repeal ongoing, we turn next towards pension reform and ensuring Social Security retirement for all AFT members, including those impacted by the WEP and the GPO penalties. I would like to introduce Alex Brown. Alex is a research manager with the National Association of State Retirement Administrators. In this role, he collects and distributes data and information covering a wide range of topics pertinent to public retirement system administration and policy. He has co-authored briefs and papers on topics such as employer and employee pension contributions, hybrid retirement plans, and pension reform. He has also discussed pension issues in front of state legislatures, public pension boards of trustees, professional associations, and other stakeholders. Prior to joining NASRA, Alex worked for the Center for State and Local Government Excellence and in the International City County Management Association. Focusing on pension and retirement healthcare issues, he holds a BS from James Madison University and an MPP from George Mason University. Alex.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks to everyone in attendance. I'm going to attempt to share my slides here. Trust you all can see those. Okay, so just in terms of background, my organization, NASRA, is a professional association for the executive directors of the nation's largest public employee retirement systems. As Rob mentioned, I am the research manager, and one of the core activities of the NASRA Research Office is documenting characteristics of public pension plan designs, including cost of living adjustments. And so I've been asked to join this panel this evening to talk about COLA issues and trends, with a particular emphasis on public employees who are outside Social Security. So, okay, starting with the image appearing on this slide, this is a screenshot of the cover of our cost of living adjustments issue brief. This is our foundational COLA resource. We update this issue brief annually, typically in the spring or early summer. This issue brief is accessible on our website, nasra.org, under issue briefs and analysis, and it covers the COLA basis, the background, different variations in COLA plan design, and is also accompanied by an appendix that identifies the specific COLA provisions for over 100 of the nation's largest state-level public retirement systems. And so this resource is going to form the basis for my following remarks. Starting off with a high-level background of COLA purpose and history. So a cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is intended to offset the effects of inflation on a pension benefit to a specific extent, depending on the COLA policy. Some COLA policies, as we'll see moving forward, call for the increase to replace up to half of inflation, for example. Others, may call for an offset of full inflation. So the policy determines the extent to which the sponsor of the pension plan is intending for that element of the benefit to offset inflation. COLA is a very consequential element of public pension plan design. It adds significantly to the value of the benefit earned by participants, and can, in some cases, add significantly to the cost of the plan, which has to be accounted for in the plan's funding policy. Automatic COLA. So an automatic COLA is a COLA that is, as the name suggests, granted automatically, does not require any outside action or intervention in order to facilitate. And an automatic COLA for most public pension plans were established in the 1970s and 1980s. The Social Security COLA was established around that time frame as well. I think 1975 was the first Social Security COLA, and several public pension plans followed suit by adding COLAs to their plan designs in response to the particularly high inflation during this period. In contrast to an automatic COLA, some public pension plans provide only what is known as an ad hoc COLA. An ad hoc COLA is one that is not granted on an automatic basis or a regular basis, but rather requires active approval by a governing body, which may be the public pension board, may be the legislature, and may have further conditions attached to the provision or amount of that COLA. So it goes without saying, but COLAs are particularly important for public employees who do not participate in Social Security. And that's a group that includes about 40% or so of the nation's public school teachers. Public employees who are outside Social Security effectively are completely reliant on their public pension benefit as their sole guaranteed source of retirement income. And while public employees who are also participating in Social Security will receive inflation protection through their Social Security benefit, obviously non-Social Security public employees are going to be missing out on that important element. So that really makes the COLA that they earn on their public pension benefit that much more important. So this is a chart that we include as a regular component of our issue brief. And this is the economic situation that forms the basis for including a COLA in a public pension plan design. This chart is plotting the impact of 20 years of inflation on the purchasing power of a hypothetical $25,000 retirement benefit. This chart is plotting two rates of inflation. The blue line is showing a hypothetical rate of inflation of 1.5% annually. So 1.5% inflation each year. The red chart is showing the actual annual inflation for the last 20 years, which averages out to 2.3% per year. But a couple things I would point out on this chart. First is that 1.5% inflation is, I think, what most people would consider to be a very low rate of inflation. But even at that low rate, over 20 years, it does reduce pretty substantially the purchasing power of that benefit. At the end of the period, the benefit is about 75% or so of the original $25,000. Just the effect, just because of the effect of several years of inflation, even at that low level. But then when we look at the actual annual inflation for the last 20 years, for the early part of the period, it tracks pretty closely with the 1.5% line, a little higher than that rate in actuality, and then takes a big dive there at the end of the period, which is a consequence, of course, of the exceptionally high inflation we've experienced recently. And that causes the purchasing power of that original $25,000 pension benefit to fall to about 60% of its original value. And I expect that when we update this chart for the next version of this issue brief, that decline will be even more significant than it appears right here on this chart. So this is the issue that the COLA is intending to address. Our issue brief identifies several common COLA types: automatic versus ad hoc, covered that previously. Simple versus compound. So a simple COLA is a COLA that's provided only on the amount of the original pension benefit. A compound COLA, by contrast, is a COLA that's provided on the original amount of the pension benefit, as well as all previously granted COLA increases. So a big distinction there. Some COLAs are tied to external indicators. The prevailing COLA model for public pension plans is an inflation-based COLA whose basis is tied to, whose provision and amount is tied to a metric for inflation, typically the annual change in the consumer price index, and maybe further limited thereafter. Another external indicator that several COLAs are tied to are the funding condition of the pension plan, the rate of investment return that the pension fund is achieving, also in some cases determines the provision and amount of the COLA benefit. Other COLA types include delayed onset, so you have to be retired for a couple of years before you can begin receiving a COLA. Minimum age of attainment to be eligible to receive a COLA, or limited benefit basis. What this design refers to as a COLA is provided on a portion of the pension benefit. So retirees who earn smaller benefits will have a greater portion of their pension benefit protected by a COLA than retirees who earn larger benefits if the COLA is provided on a limited benefit basis. So this is all to say that there's substantial variation in the design of cost adjustments in the public sector. So in terms of recent trends, since 2009, states have reduced, suspended, or eliminated the COLAs that they provide. This is in an effort to reduce liabilities and costs. This is consistent with what we have termed the era of pension reform. Lots of changes to plan designs during this period. COLAs affected significantly as well in many states. Because of the substantial cost of the COLA in many cases, I think a lot of state legislatures really found this to be sort of low-hanging fruit to be able to achieve the kind of cost savings they were looking to attain through pension reform. And so that's why a lot of automatic COLAs were lowered, were suspended, or outright eliminated during this period. Prior to 2009, I'm fairly certain that the accuracy of this statement. Prior to 2009, no COLA change was made that affected current retirees. And as we'll see in a moment, that is definitely no longer true. Until recently, low inflation has protected many retirees against the impact of COLA reduction. So although these benefits were being reduced since 2009, because inflation was so low, the COLAs that were being provided in many cases were still sufficient to achieve the purpose of offsetting the impact of inflation. However, recent higher inflation has certainly increased the focus on the adequacy of the COLAs that are being provided. So I mentioned the wave of reforms occurring since 2009. That's what we're looking at here on this map. States that have made changes to cost of living adjustments since 2009, 33 states in total. And changes fall into one of three broad categories. We've got states shaded in green or teal, made changes affecting new hires only. So change the COLA terms for prospective public employees. States in blue made changes affecting current employees and new hires. And then states shaded in beige, and that's the dominant group there, made changes affecting the COLAs for participants already retired and receiving benefits. So I mentioned prior to 2009, no state had made a change affecting retiree COLAs. Now, several states indicated here on this map have made that type of change. And it's worth mentioning all the changes here flow down. So if retirees were getting their COLA cut, so are active employees, so are new hires, and so on. A couple things worth noting here. Just about all of the states that made changes affecting retiree COLAs were sued, and the outcome of those lawsuits was in many cases, but not all cases, to affirm the state's ability to make that change. So there was a significant legal action around several of these changes. Another thing worth pointing out is that some states are not shaded on this map. As I covered earlier, some states only provide an ad hoc COLA. So there's no automatic COLA provided by several states, including Texas, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and others. And so effectively, those states didn't have any benefit to cut. But make no mistake, several of these states that provide an ad hoc COLA have not, until recently, not provided that benefit in several years. So I talked about COLAs that are contingent on an external factor, such as the annual change in the rate of inflation. So we refer to that as a CPI-based COLA. That's the prevailing COLA type in the public sector. Based on the annual change, usually in CPI, either national CPI or regional CPI, usually restricted to a specific percentage of the change. So an example of this type of COLA might be 1/2 of CPI, and then further subjected to a cap, such as 1/2 of CPI, not to exceed 3%. So in this arrangement, the retiree is going to bear the risk of inflation above that threshold or cap. They'll be protected from inflation as long as it remains below the threshold or cap established by the COLA policy. But anything higher than that, they'll have some exposure. The advantage to the plan sponsor of this model is that the COLA will likely not ever be higher than is necessary to protect against inflation. However, if the inflation exceeds the cap, as it has recently exceeded many of these contingent or limited COLA caps, then the COLA will fall short of offsetting the effect of inflation. Another example of contingent or limited COLAs that I talked about earlier was plans that provide COLAs or provide larger COLAs when an established benchmark, such as the plan's assumed rate of investment return, is exceeded by the fund's annual investment earnings. So in this model, the COLAs are effectively paid for from excess, so-called excess investment earnings, rather than contributions to the plan. The disadvantage here is that a COLA provided by this model may be infrequent and inadequate to preserve purchasing power, because inflation and investment performance may not sync up in a way that would allow for larger COLAs to be provided during periods of higher inflation. They may have no relationship with one another. The arrangement discussed here subjects retirees not only to the regular inflation risk that they're subjected to in the CPI-based COLA model, but also investment risk, because the size of their COLA is determined by the fund's investment performance. And so when we look at broad trends in CPI over decades, this is another chart we include in the issue brief that looks at the 3-year smooth rolling average change in inflation as measured by the CPI for the period 1950 to 2022. And so I just want to call out, two time periods on this chart. The period, 1970 to 1990 or so. Inflation for this period, spiked pretty significantly in the late 70s and early 80s. This was the period that Social Security introduced its COLA. Most public pension plans introduced their COLA, and you can sort of see why they made that decision to do that. Average inflation for this period, this 20-year period, 1970 to 1990, is about 6.3% or so. So you think about an automatic COLA of 3%, that's replacing, half of inflation. Most, states were satisfied with their policy. Then the following period, you see inflation, begins to become much lower, including the recent decades where it fell very low, under 2% on a 3-year rolling basis for several of those years. And this is the period where you begin to see some of these COLAs begin to be rolled back. Now we have inflation spiking for the most recent year. And I think states are really beginning to assess the adequacy of their COLA. States that provided only ad hoc COLAs are faced with pressure to provide a benefit that they really haven't provided in decades previously. So I have included in my slides several examples of COLA provisions for non-social security plans. You can review this material on your own. You'll have a copy of these slides distributed to you after the session, so I'm not going to go through all of these examples. I do, however, want to just highlight a couple ad hoc COLAs among non-social security plans. So I want to just mention, in principle, non-social security plans are more likely to provide an automatic COLA than their social security covered counterparts. And this is for the reasons I identified at the beginning of my remarks, because the COLA for the inflation protection provided by the COLA for non-social security participants is just that much more important, because they lack access to guaranteed inflation protected income provided by Social Security. So there are fewer examples of ad hoc COLAs for non-social security plans than there are for social security plans. But there are a couple examples cited out here on this slide of ad hoc COLAs provided by non-social security plans. The largest of which is probably the last plan indicated here on this slide. The COLAs for retired Texas teachers are subject to approval by the legislature, and then further limited by a state law requiring the plan's amortization period, the period that its actuarial valuation is identifying its unfunded liabilities to be eliminated within, has to be less than 31 years in order for a COLA to be approved. So there's sort of two levels of approval there required for teachers in the state of Texas to receive a COLA. So final thoughts is just a sort of summary of my remarks thus far, and I would be happy to take questions at the end of this session or any time thereafter.
Thank you, Alex, for a pretty thorough summary of the state retirement system COLA. AFT has supported member-driven campaigns to win COLA from teachers and state retirement systems in the past, and we will continue to do so whenever COLAs are needed. Last year in Ohio, we saw accumulation of 5-year campaign that led to OFT result in the STRS COLA being reinstated and 2 OFT members being elected to sit on the STRS board. If anyone is aware of a similar campaign in your own state, or if you would like more information on successful campaigns in Ohio, please reach out to the AFT retirement program, as they will be happy to assist you. Okay. Last but not least, we will hear from Roger Boudreau on activities currently undertaken by the national movement to repeal WEP and GPO. He will also let us know how those looking at getting involved can plug into this motivated and member-driven group of activists. Roger was the president of AFT Local 1461 for 25 years of a 30-year teaching career. Pretty impressive. Since 2007, he has served as both the president of Rhode Island's AFT Retirement Chapter 8037R and a member of AFT Standing Committee on Retirement Issues, now the AFT Retirees PPC. He sits on AFT Pensions Trustee Council as an elected board trustee representing the retirees for Employment Retirement Systems of Rhode Island. Finishing his 4-year term, on today's panel, he will join us as a member of Repeal WEP GPO National Task Force, which originated in May of 2020. I want to thank you, Roger, for being here, and please take it away.
Thank you, Rob. I'm actually finishing my 4th 4-year term as trustee on ERSRI. And I want to start by giving a shout out to the AFT Afterburners, who've been absolutely tremendous in terms of the work that they've done, not only on behalf of our issue, but with respect to targeted political races, even going back to the height of the pandemic and making wellness calls member to member. Just a terrific group. And if there are retirees in on the webinar with a little bit of time to spare, I would strongly urge you to check into the AFT Afterburners. It's a good chance to remain connected not only to your organization, but also to individual members around the country. And it's a joy to share experiences with them as we've all done with our own close colleagues in the past. The origins, as Rob said, with respect to the National Repeal Task Force began in May of 2020. I guess you could say it was COVID driven to some extent. It was begun by Bette Marafino, who is the Alliance Retired Americans president. the Connecticut chapter. She was joined by other Connecticut members, along with myself and John Prenorio from Rhode Island, some ARA members from Massachusetts, Social Security Fairness.org, Bonnie Seidel from the San Francisco area in California, Susie Dixon from the our Retired Teachers Association, for which she was a legislative liaison at the time. She's now the president-elect. And from a handful of 10 or 12 individuals, mostly ARA connected, but not all, we grew and spent the rest of that last part of the 116th congressional session, increasing our membership, growing the task force in anticipation of some well-deserved wins in the 2021 election with a Republican minority now and a Democratic majority in both the House and the Senate, even though the Senate was by a tie vote, and the White House, of course, not to say the least. As a consequence of that, 2021 and 2022 and the 117th Congress were focused on trying to get bills to the floor. As many indicated initially, H.R. 82 came in very early in that congressional session. It was the task force that pushed the number of co-sponsors from what was roughly about 230 sponsors initially, as we began a hard sale push on legislators to bring it up to the requisite 290, which would hopefully get it to the floor, and ultimately to the total of 3,005 by the time we reached the end of that session. Unfortunately, as was indicated, we were unsuccessful with that, but we were undeterred by it because in the interim, particularly during the second half of that congressional session, in the spring of 2022, the task force put together a lobby and rally day on May 18th. That was very successful. Representative Larson of Connecticut spoke to his Sacred Trust Social Security 2021 bill. Also, members from other delegations spoke that day, but most importantly, and most touching were the individual personal stories by members of the task force in terms of the impact of the WEP and GPO on them. Coming out of that, piggybacked on that actually, was a two-day PPC meeting. The retiree PPC met on the 19th and 20th, and I had drafted a proposed resolution, a draft for the PPC to take up at that time, which they did. It was vetted, ultimately finalized, and put into shape for my former local AFT 1461 in Lincoln Teachers Association in Rhode Island to submit as a resolution for the convention, which was held in Boston in July. That resolution was passed at that convention unanimously on Sunday morning, and we've since been working very closely with AFT, along, of course, with the ARA, who's been with us since the beginning. They've been regularly attending our meetings. We were meeting on an every other week basis early on, but since the rally and lobby day, we've been meeting on a weekly basis. We're looking to go forward in the coming congressional session now that 82 has been dropped, and we're looking to push that number of co-sponsors once again, as we did successfully in the last Congress. We have also divided ourselves into 4 different focus groups. Before I get to those, though, let me mention that in the recent months in working with AFT, we were successful in sending a letter to the Secretary of Education, Secretary Cardona, out of concern particularly for 2 issues, one being compliance with the Social Security Act of 2004, which requires new hires as of January 1, 2005, to sign a document from the Social Security Administration, it's SSA 1945, which informs folks that by taking that position in a district that doesn't participate in Social Security, they will be adversely impacting any earned benefits that they have in the Social Security system upon retirement and filing for those benefits. Anecdotal information that's come to us indicates that there is widespread noncompliance. In part, it may be contributing to the teacher shortage crisis that's currently in existence, particularly for people with second careers who, when they see that form, if in fact it's presented to them, which many times it's not, find out that they're going to be impacted and they choose to decline the position as a result. So we are looking to Follow that up with assistance and engagement by the Social Security Administration, working with the Department of Education. The AFT has been working with the task force to get to those folks where they have contacts, which they do, fortunately for us, as a task force. And the task force will be focusing coming up this session with 4 goals, essentially. The first is outreach to expand the task force itself. I'm looking specifically at engaging with the National Institute for Retirement Security, which has tremendous resources for research, which would show how the repeal of WEP and GPO would have a spin-off economic effect in communities and states around the country through their Pensionomics 2023, which was recently released. Additionally, we have obviously a legislative group that's going to be focusing on and tracking issues relating to bills that are dropped relating to the repeal of WEP and GPO. As Meghan indicated earlier, we want to make sure that that they're focused in the way that we want them to be. I will be chairing that group on compliance and awareness, getting information out to active teachers so that they have an ample opportunity while they're in service to prepare and plan for better retirement security if in fact we're unsuccessful in our efforts. I hope that's not the case. And of course, we need communications both internally and externally, and a 4th group will be focusing on that in the task force. A shout out for the likelihood that I believe will take place in the TEACH conference scheduled for this July. I believe that the conference will include an AFT update on the repeal of WEP GPO, any activities and events that take place in relation to the task force and the AFT between now and July, as well as a little bit of a historical platform that you've been given tonight by me. So with that, I will turn it back over to Rob, and thank you all for attending tonight, and thanks to the AFT for all their support and assistance.
Thanks a lot, Roger. Thanks. So we have a few minutes left, not a lot, but we have a few minutes for a few questions. So I'm going to ask Chris, who's been monitoring the chat or the Q&A, to bring some questions forward for our panelists. Chris?
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rob. First, I want to elevate the work that some of our excellent retiree activists have been doing. Roger, of course, is a wonderful leader on this issue, the task force as well. And I just posted in the chat, and I'll post it again, the story of 2 retiree activists, Marianne Maloney and Jane Roth, who are fighting to keep their Social Security benefits. So please, if you have a chance, we'll send that up in the follow-up email as well, but check that out if you get an opportunity. There are a couple of questions that have come in that I think Meghan would be best suited to answer. So first, why are these WEP and GPO provisions really only impacting people in 15 states? Could you explain a little bit more about the reasoning there, and then if these people are still paying into Social Security as well?
That's a great question, Chris. So the states, those 15 states, if you're a public servant in those states, you're not paying into Social Security, and your employer isn't paying into Social Security. So if you finished college and you spent your whole career working in public service in one of those states, you probably wouldn't be you wouldn't really be impacted by WEP all that much, because you're just kind of like your career is fully spent outside of the Social Security system. However, people are entering education at all sorts of ages and after having worked in all sorts of different places, so that the most acute WEP penalty is felt by someone who maybe they taught for 15 years in a state that wasn't impacted by WEP, and then they moved to a state that was. So essentially with WEP GPO, if you spent like a chunk of your career, over 10 years of your career in a state or in the private sector where you were paying into Social Security, what WEP does unfairly is that it essentially kind of like really greatly diminishes your Social Security benefit. So it tends to be it tends to disproportionately hurt folks who worked in Social Security covered employment when they were paying into the Social Security system, and then worked in public service in one of those 15 states.
And if I could, that, Rob,
Yeah, please.
Go ahead, Roger.
I think the answer to the question is largely a political one. When this went into effect, there were excuse me, not when this went into effect, but when Social Security for public agencies was superseded by public pensions, there was an option for states as well as municipalities in terms of whether or not they wanted to participate. So this was largely a legislative decision in those states. I'm going to use Rhode Island as an example. Roughly half of the teachers are covered and participate in Social Security, and the other half don't. And the reason that the other half don't is because those municipalities made a decision, sometimes in conjunction with collective bargaining, where they said, look, we can either give you Social Security or a 6.5% raise. Which would you prefer? And so the decision is made in different ways in different places. But in those states that are not affected, all of those legislatures essentially chose not only to offer a public pension, whatever form it may have taken, but additionally chose to provide the Social Security employers' contributions.
Thank you, Roger. Quick correction to what I said earlier. Mary Ann and Jane are actually both with us on the call tonight. So thank you both for joining, and they are still teaching. So they are leaders in this fight on top of all of the other work that they're doing as educators. So again, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Another question, Meghan, will HR 82 consider those who are already affected by WEP and GPO? Basically, what happens to people who have been affected by WEP and GPO for years if the bill is passed?
That's a great question. So HR 82 is really only perspective. Like so if HR 82 is enacted, what would happen would be that so if I'm retired and I've been penalized by WEP for 10 years, and then HR 82 is passed, I don't get made whole for the 10 years I've spent under the WEP penalty, but moving forward, I would get a larger Social Security check because the WEP wouldn't be applied to my Social Security benefits.
And also, we know that the current leadership in the House is calling for debt reform, and they've also been playing chicken with the debt ceiling. What do we think the chances are for WEP and GPO in that context?
I think that, clearly what Republicans are doing is dangerous, right? Like they're playing with the full faith and credit of the United States, and any defaulting on our debt could put the United States economy into recession. So one, just to kind of state that up front, that's incredibly negative. From what I've heard, and it's mostly speculation at this point, Republicans are going to try to package their budget as not hurting Social Security. Most experts think that it would have the potential to hurt Social Security along with other entitlements. I tend to think that Republicans, when they present their budget, they're not going to package it as something that hurts Social Security. They don't really want to talk about Social Security. So I tend to think that WEP GPO really is not going to be a part of the conversation around the debt ceiling or the budget. So yeah, I really think that HR 82 is kind of moving on a separate path.
All right. Thank you so much, Meghan, for answering those questions. Those were some of the most frequently asked questions that we had here. And we'll take a look at all the questions that people have asked and see if we're able to get you some more follow-ups. For now, I would like to turn it back over to Rob to close us out for tonight.
Thanks, Chris, and I want to thank our great presenters. They were wonderful, and even though I'm subject to both of these, I learned a lot tonight. I want to thank Meghan, Alex, and Roger for taking the time to share their knowledge, their expertise with us. But most of all, I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's session. We hope you find this information useful and that you are able to identify at least one way that you can get involved with the effort to repeal WEP and GPO. Please keep an eye out for the follow-up email from AFT Retires Program with a recording of this webinar and links to resources and articles mentioned during this evening's discussion and opportunities to sign up for WEP and GPO repeal phone banks. I want everybody to have a great night, stay safe, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.